We have some breaking news tonight concerning the FBI. New York Times just now reporting that 2 FBI officials resigned tonight. One of those officials is an FBI lawyer who has become a real boogeyman on the right. Her name is Lisa Page. Lisa Page was counsel at the FBI to both fired FBI Director James Comey and Deputy Director Andrew McCabe, who has also been fired. Lisa Page became a character in conservative media fever dreams about the Mueller investigation when it emerged that she and another senior FBI agent who was overseeing part of the investigation into the Trump-Russia connection, they had exchanged text messages, personal messages, snarking at or speaking negatively, or in some cases speaking positively, of various political figures, including Donald Trump, but also, honestly, Hillary Clinton and John Kasich and Ted Cruz and Bernie Sanders and Eric Holder and a whole bunch of other people, too. The text messages started to be made public by Republican members of Congress in January, but Lisa Page has stayed on at the Bureau since then until tonight, whereupon until tonight, and now we have just learned that she has resigned and left the Bureau. The New York Times also reports tonight that the other FBI official who is gone as of today is James Baker. Now, he's a very senior FBI official. Until December, he was general counsel at the FBI. He's one of the people who James Comey briefed about his interactions with the president leading up to President Trump firing James Comey. Mr. Baker was reassigned to some unknown job within the FBI after Comey's firing, whereupon Republicans and conservative media figures started accusing him of being the source who leaked the existence of the Christopher Steele dossier to reporters. According to our reporting, Mr. Baker was reassigned to basically a potted plant job at the FBI, one much further down the food chain than his previous job as the top lawyer at the FBI, but there really was no explanation for the reassignment. Well, the New York Times reports tonight that Baker had been investigated by DOJ on suspicion of having shared classified information with reporters, though he certainly has not been charged with that. Mr. Baker also tells the New York Times that he is joining the Brookings Institution now upon leaving the FBI. He tells the Times, quote, "I love the FBI. I have tremendous respect for the Bureau. The FBI was great, is great, and will be great," which presumably means it doesn't need to be made great again. So that's the breaking news tonight out of the FBI. The New York Times is reporting that the decisions by Lisa Page and Jim Baker to resign from the FBI today, those decisions to resign were reportedly not related to each other. These things both happening at once, but apparently not as connected matters. We do know that both of them worked closely with Comey during his time as FBI director, particularly during the investigation into Hillary Clinton's email server, as well as the start of the investigation into the Trump campaign in Russia. We also know, thanks to Comey's testimony, that Baker was one of the people that Comey told about his interactions with the president at the start of the administration. And Andrew McCabe, another one of those people. Jim Baker's integrity and commitment to the rule of law have benefited our country through 5 presidents of both parties. We are fortunate he and so many others choose to devote their lives to justice. All right, much more ahead tonight. Stay with us.
Feature the threat we were dealing with 3 years ago. Their efforts through a siren song that was coming mostly on social media to attract people to come live and fight with them in Syria and Iraq. The second prong of the threat is their efforts, again, through social media primarily, with slick propaganda, hyper-violence, to try to either inspire or enable or direct people in the United States to engage in acts of violence. That was a huge feature of the work the FBI was focused on in 2015 especially, and I'll say more about that. The third element of the threat is the threat we're worried about going forward, which is the terrorist diaspora. The Islamic State, so-called, will be crushed by military force in their caliphate, and between the fingers of that crush, unfortunately, are going to come hundreds of really bad people who will flow out of the conflict zones and go someplace, and places we worry about a great deal. So those are the 3 prongs of the ISIS threat. The first prong, the traveler phenomenon, as I said, was a big feature of our work in 2014 and 15, and beginning in 16, we started to see a change. The number of Americans trying to leave and travel, primarily by departing and going to Turkey, sometimes to North Africa, and then heading into Syria, started to drop. And in about the early summer of 2016, it hit the floor and has stayed there since the summer of 2016. The ISIS terrorists have lost their ability to attract people to their so-called caliphate for a variety of reasons. We still see ones and twos of people trying to do it, but the phenomenon we were facing in 14 and 15 of dozens of people trying to travel every month has dropped and hit the floor and stayed down. That's good news. Second, their efforts to use the power of social media to get those who are not going to travel to kill where they are peaked in the spring of 2015. And that's because they invested for almost a year in a social media brand in constantly pushing out these images and this siren song, "Come or kill, come or kill." That began to bear fruit with troubled Americans in the spring of 2015. And in the spring and summer of 2015, I got to tell you, the FBI was strapped. We were attempting to follow, to cover electronically with court orders or cover physically dozens and dozens and dozens of people who we assessed were on the cusp of violence. And I was asked on Capitol Hill, do you have enough people? And the answer was, I don't if this continues. Because we were pulling, at that time, people off surveillance in criminal cases of all kinds, counterintelligence cases, to help us deal with this explosion in people who were seeking meaning in this sick, misguided way and moving towards violence. The good news is that spike stopped after 2015. Their ability to direct, to not just enable, but to direct people to engage in acts of violence dropped, in part because military force took some of the directors off the battlefield and stopped ISIS's ability to reach into the United States through Twitter, find converts, and push them to action. That left us, though, with a lingering phenomenon, which is people being enabled and inspired, not directed so much, but enabled and inspired through a search for meaning and coming across the hyper-violence images of the Islamic State, so-called, and being told by the propaganda, be on God's side in the ultimate fight. Kill where you are, and it will bring you honor and glory. We are still dealing with that phenomenon because things live forever on the internet. Anwar al-Awlaki remains a major feature of radicalization on the internet. We're still dealing with, in the area of 1,000 cases around the United States, where we are investigating to understand where is somebody on the spectrum between consuming the poison and acting on the poison. And what makes this so hard for us is how do we see them and how do we assess them in a good way? Because it involves a search for meaning, there isn't a particular marker. Humans of all ages, of all backgrounds are seeking meaning, and a small group of all different kinds of ages and backgrounds spread all over the country are seeking meaning in this particular way. And so it's very difficult for us to answer the question, so what does the person you're most worried about look like? And how do you spot them? What are the markers of their radicalization? That is something we continue to work on, but remains elusive to us, that algorithm to tell us who the bad guys are and where they are. This is the thing that keeps me up at night, worrying about where is the person who may be bent on the next San Bernardino, the next Orlando attack. Will anybody close to them tell us what they see so that we can get on it? And even when we investigate someone, all of you know, we investigated the Orlando killer for 10 months, and in my view did a quality investigation. I've looked at it very, very hard and didn't find anything we could use to incapacitate that person. In fact, didn't find any indicators of radicalization at that point. And I actually believe that killer radicalized much closer to the event. So our challenge is, how do we find those? How do we assess them? How do we stop them? That dominates the FBI's work today. The third prong is the ghost of Christmas future that we worry about every single day. Because when the caliphate is crushed and those hundreds and thousands of people flow out, where are they going? They're going to Western Europe, they're going to Southeast Asia, they're going to North Africa. And then what are they going to do there? These are the most radical of the radical, who are now not just radical in orientation, but have been equipped with military battlefield experience and tactics. And so the future we worry about every single day is, how do we spot them and stop them as they flow out, bent on continuing the global jihad by taking the fight to innocent people in those regions. The one we're focused on, obviously keenly, because it's so easy to get here from there, is Western Europe. Western Europe is the front line of the FBI's and our U.S. government's efforts to stop those killers before they kill in Western Europe or kill here. And this is something we're about every day, trying to share information in a very good way and to break down barriers. And I've said to many, many of my European colleagues, 3,000 people died in my beloved country on a single day in 2001, and as a result, we changed. We knitted ourselves together across city lines, county lines, state lines, international lines. We connected the NYPD and FBI in ways that people found imaginable. We integrated the intelligence community of the United States and the military services of the United States to share and to focus and go to the fight with jointness. We changed this country for the better. Please don't need that. Please don't need that in Europe. We must work with you to share information, but it's incumbent upon you to try to break down all of those barriers that we faced before 9/11 and break them down today in the EU so you can spot and stop the threat. As we do this work, the business executives from national security have been very, very helpful to the FBI. One of the things they focused on and gave us feedback on was, are we doing a good enough job of thinking well inside the FBI about connecting the dots and sharing information? One of the things we are now doing much, much better, thanks to that feedback, is that we have knitted together our intelligence analysts and our special agents, again, in ways, to use what I said about the NYPD, that would have been unimaginable 15, 20 years ago. We now train our analysts and agents together. When you walk into a classroom at Quantico, everybody's wearing the same color golf shirts, sitting behind the same computer screens. You can't tell who is who. And that's the way we want it. We want to go to the fight with everybody owning the mission and understanding what they bring to the fight. And it isn't, well, I'm a special agent, this is my world, I'm an intelligence analyst, this is my world. It is a joint world inside the FBI. And so training the kids to be that way, not just in the classroom, but to have them work out together, drink beer together, which we don't do enough, frankly, to know each other and what they can contribute. So then when they hit the field offices all over this amazing country, they know what to bring and what's expected from their partners. So they train together for 10 or 11 weeks, and then the intelligence analysts graduate, and the special agents stay, because they're majoring in something very different, and focus on the things they need to know to be special agents, especially the tactical and physical aspects of their job. But that jointness is starting at Quantico from the bottom, and we're pushed it down from the top, training all of our supervisors and leaders to have that kind of integration inside the FBI. And I don't want to proclaim perfection, but we have made a lot of progress in the last 3 years. Working together inside the FBI to share the information that the special agents are able to gather all over the country in a great way, assess it, and then push it out to our partners is what will make us more effective every day. So that's my update on the counterterrorism threat. I want to give you an update on cyber. Every threat the FBI faces today comes at us through the internet. Counterintelligence, all the criminal threats, harm to children, fraudsters, stalking, gangs, all of that has a digital aspect to it. The one that does not yet have a significant digital aspect to it, in the same way, is the terrorist threat. The terrorists have not yet turned to trying to use the internet as an instrument of destruction. They use it to proselytize, to communicate, to recruit, to direct, but they have not yet turned, with some minor exceptions, to looking to harm us by coming through the digital vector. Logic tells us in the FBI that is a threat we will face. Eventually, these knuckleheads will figure out that as hard as we make it for them to come in as a human being, they can come in as a photon at 186,000 miles per second and do harm to this great country of ours. So what are we doing to try to be more effective when all the threats we face are coming at us through the cyber vector, through the internet? We're doing 5 things, but they're pretty simple, so I want to explain all 5 of them to you. We're trying to focus ourselves in a better way in the FBI. There's a danger that we could try to become the jack of all trades and end up being the master of none. And so we're doing a couple things that are very unusual for the FBI. The normal way we assign work in the Bureau is based on answering this question: where did it happen? If the bank robbery happened here in Austin, the Austin resident agency of the FBI will work it. Right? If a fraud occurred in California, we'll figure out, well, where did it occur and assign it to that field office. We've decided that the threats that are coming at us through the internet are such that the physical manifestation is actually not all that meaningful. And then what we ought to do is assign work based on talent. And so we now have a cyber threat team model in the FBI where we assign significant cyber threats based on which field office shows the best chops against that threat. A particular element of the threat posed by the Chinese, for example, a particular element of a threat coming from Russia, which of our field offices has shown the greatest initiative, energy, and talent against that? And they will then own that. Whether that's Little Rock or Houston or Seattle, you got it because you've shown you're great. And then what we do, because we're not oblivious to physical manifestations of threats, if an intrusion manifests at a company in Springfield, Illinois, or in Tampa, Florida, we will allow that field office to help. We'll call the first field office our strat office. They own the strategic threat. We'll allow the others to be our TAC offices, our tactical offices. Up to 4 of them can help. And we'll air traffic control that from headquarters. We think this makes sense given the nature of the threat. And the added benefit it brings to the FBI is it fosters a pretty awesome competition inside the FBI for each field office to say, no, we're actually better than Little Rock. You ought to give us this aspect of the threat, and we'll show you how well we worked it so you can take it away from those terrible people in Little Rock and give it to us here in San Antonio. That is a healthy thing for the FBI and for the American people. Then we're doing something else that we borrowed from counterterrorism. Our counterterrorism agents have long been organized in fly teams, which are people who are prepared with a go bag at a moment's notice to head to an aircraft and go to a scene of an attack anywhere in the world or in the United States to help us figure out what happened. We've built such a thing with cyber. We have cyber agents and analysts all over the country who are experts, and their commitment is, we give you the signal, you go to where we need expert investigation on a moment's notice. Our cyber action teams, our CAT folks, are all over the country, and again, there's great competition to be on the CAT that is very healthy for the FBI. And then, as I hope you know, in all 56 field offices, we have cyber task forces. That is the resident talent that's not just FBI talent, but involves partners from all different kinds of agencies that sits there and does the work in the field offices. Then there's one other way we're trying to focus ourselves. When we try to hire special agents for the FBI, we need a number of buckets of attributes. We need integrity. We need physicality. We're going to give you a weapon on behalf of the United States. You need to be able to run, fight, and shoot. So integrity, physicality, and obviously we need intelligence. To find cyber agents, we need integrity, physicality, intelligence, and technical expertise. This collection of attributes is rare in nature. We will find people of integrity who are really smart and know cyber and can't do a push-up. Or we'll find people, maybe can do a push-up, and they know they're smart and they can do cyber, but they want to smoke weed on the way to the interview. And so you can see the challenge we face. And so we are trying to focus ourselves in a good way on, so where is the talent? And I don't want to say too much because my interests are not aligned with everybody in this audience because I'm trying to steal your talent. But, so where is the talent? What talent do we actually need? And how might we get it in a clever way? So it's a work in progress. We're trying to figure out, should cyber squads in the FBI be different? Does everybody need a gun? Should we be 8 people in a squad, which is a typical squad size, but 2 gun-carrying special agents and 6 something elses that are people of integrity, skip push-ups and stuff, people of intelligence and technical expertise? Or another possibility is, do we take integrity, physicality, and regular IQ, high IQ, and train our own? Do we build our own university inside the FBI? Should we make it easier to do something that is culturally impossible to this point in the FBI, for people to become special agents and then leave and go work in the private sector and then come back to the FBI? Because the current rule is, you leave us for more than 24 months, you're going back through Quantico. Now what happens is, our people leave, go to the private sector, discover it's a soulless, empty way to live. And then they realize my life is empty, I need moral content in my work, and so they come back. And I gave the creds for the second time to a 42-year-old cyber agent, and I said, so how was Quantico? He said it was a nightmare. It was a nightmare. And so we're trying to figure out, are there ways we should approach this differently to recognize the challenge we have in attracting talent? And I joked about this, but the discriminator for the FBI is I compete with the private sector on moral content. I mean, the pitch to the talented young people is, look, you're not going to make a living with us. You'll make a life. It's hard, it's stressful, but holy cow, is it addictive to do good for a living. Come be part of this. That's how we compete against the private sector, but it's hard because the private sector's got big bags of dough to weigh against my moral content, and it is a struggle for us. And so we're going to be smart enough and agile enough to try and experiment with different ways to get our talent. That focus is going to make a difference. Second thing we're trying to do, the bad guys have made the world tiny. Right? Belarus and Boston are next door to each other on the internet. And so we need, I'm not picking on Belarus, I needed a B, by the way. And so we need to shrink it back to be effective. We need to make the world as small for the good people as it is for the bad people. And so to do that, the Bureau's doing a number of things. We're forward deploying more of our talent than ever before, embedding cyber agents and cyber analysts in our legal attaché operations around the country, because although it's a digital threat, the physical relationship makes a huge difference. We are also trying to make sure that inside the U.S. government, we inside the USG have shrunk the distance between each other. We now have guidance that really just summarized the way we were acting in the cyber domain from President Obama that lays it out like this. DHS has responsibility for cyber response, for people figuring out how to harden their networks, for helping critical infrastructure think about how to be safer and better, and for helping with remediation. The FBI, through the Justice Department, has the lead on investigation. Our role is to respond to threats, to try and see threats in the neighborhood before they emerge and stop them. And then the Director of National Intelligence has the responsibility for equipping all of that with good thinking and great intelligence. Now, that explanation should not even matter to you, because if we're doing it right, it shouldn't matter who anyone calls inside the government when you have a problem. Where we are after 15 years in the counterterrorism world is, it does not matter who you speak to anywhere in law enforcement about a counterterrorism threat. It doesn't matter whether you walk up to an FBI agent or to a deputy sheriff. If you say you saw something, it will get to the right people within minutes. It should be totally off of your radar screen and thinking about who should I tell. We want to get to that place when it comes to cyber. Doesn't matter whether you come to the FBI or DHS or Secret Service as part of DHS, we'll figure it out inside our organizations because we have shrunk the distance between each other. The third thing we're trying to do is impose costs. The challenge we face is that the bad guys think it's a freebie. Whether those bad guys are part of a nation-state operation, a criminal syndicate, hacktivists, thieves, stalkers, creeps of all kinds. They sit there in their pajamas at their keyboard, halfway around the world, and hurt America. Steal our secrets, steal our innovation, threaten our children, threaten our Jewish community centers, and think that because they are halfway around the world, they're safe. We must make them, physically ideally, but maybe metaphysically, feel our breath on the back of their necks and impose a cost. And the reason we think this makes sense is I'm not aware of any hacking that has yet occurred high on crack or inflamed by finding a lover in the arms of another. Hacking is done thoughtfully. People are susceptible to deterrence when they sit at a keyboard. If they are afraid of us, it will change their behavior. So the FBI is keen to put handcuffs on people all around the world to impose costs. We are keen where we can't to name it and to shame it, sometimes through an indictment. And oftentimes people say, well, this indictment is really an empty gesture. Maybe. We are dogged people. We just gave up on D.B. Cooper. For the younger folks, he's a guy who jumped out of an airplane over the Cascades with a bunch of stolen money, ransom money, and disappeared. We didn't give up for 52 years, I think. We're dogged people. And hackers like to travel. They want their children to be educated overseas. Never say never. When your face is on a wanted poster, even if you're in another country on the other side of the earth, it gets your attention. And in getting your attention, we hope to change behavior. And we also hope, by naming and shaming conduct, to get nation states to help grapple with us towards a set of norms. What is appropriate for a government to engage in? What is theft? And part of getting to that framework is calling out the behavior, either through criminal process or simply through declaring it for what it is. That imposition of costs is at the center of our strategy. Fourth part of our strategy, obviously, everybody in law enforcement has to be able to investigate with digital expertise. Used to be in the good old days, you'd roll up and do a search warrant in a drug case, and you'd hit the place, you'd find some kilos and some guns, and you'd find a black composition notebook where the knuckleheads would have written down who gets how much money, who's responsible for how much drugs, and you'd photocopy it, put an exhibit sticker on it, we're good to go. Today, you're going to hit thumb drive, PDA, laptop, electronic devices of all kinds, and your ability to understand the digital world and investigate there is at the essence of all law enforcement. We in the FBI have an obligation to help our partners raise their digital game because we can't get to it all. I'm told there are people, maybe in this audience, who've gotten emails from me from Nigeria. Where, as the president of the FBI, I ask you, sometimes I spell my last name corny, I ask you to wire me money in Nigeria. Don't do that. But people get defrauded. People get ripped off, and the FBI does not have the resources to get to it all. Our state and local partners have to be able to, and we need to help them. And the last piece is the hardest of all. We have to figure out how to share information more effectively across a barrier, there must always be a barrier, between the public and the private. We must find a way to make the barrier consistent with law and policy and norms semi-permeable. Because nearly all of the digital world is in private hands in this country, and it should be. That's a wonderful thing. But that means all the victims, all the indicators of where the bad guys are and what they're doing lies in private hands. And we're in a terrible place. A vast majority of computer intrusions in this country are not reported to us. People convince themselves in private entities, you know what, I'll just pay this ransom because I got to get my operations back. Or we'll just hire one of these great firms and we'll remediate this and we'll get on with our business. You're kidding yourself if you think that your interests and our interests are not aligned. They will be back. They will be back at your company, your people, your neighborhood, your industry. It is short-sighted to think, I just need to get on with my work. I'm not going to tell anybody about this. The challenge we face in cooperating across the barrier is mostly cultural. And it's cultural in a number of different respects. We have cultural flaws on our side where the default is to hold close. The default is to say, well, this came from a classified source. I can't share this with companies in the United States, when we really could in most instances, because they don't need sources and methods. They need indicators. They need ones and zeros from us. But we often find ourselves with information, people in this room will know what this means, it's labeled ORCON. It's originator controlled. And so we look at that and say, that's too hard. Because I'd have to go back to the people who gave it to us and say, I want to share it with the XYZ Corporation. And that's messy and difficult and it's hard. So it's ORCON stuff, so I'll keep it to myself. We need culturally to get to a place where the default is figuring out how to equip the private sector with those indicators of compromise so they can protect themselves, and to do it faster. That's one of our cultural challenges. A cultural challenge on the other side is companies need to understand that we treat them as victims. And we are good at treating victims in a responsible, sensitive way. We have long experience doing that, including in the cyber realm. We will not re-victimize you. We will not share in an inappropriate way your information. We do not want your memos and your emails and your drawings. We need the indicators of compromise. What we need to do is talk to each other in a better way. And I know one of the major obstacles are the weenie general counsels. I used to be a weenie general counsel. That's why I use that term. And here's the problem with general counsels. They're awesome. Their job is to worry. And so when their chief security officer or the chief information security officer comes to them and says, you know, we see this thing, looks like an advanced persistent threat, we got to call the Bureau and get them in here to figure out what's going on. The general counsel goes, hold on. What's that going to mean for our exposure to headline risk, to brand risk, to litigation, to competitive harm if you're a government contractor? Don't do that. See if you can fix it yourself. And so part of my audience is not here today, which is general counsels of large enterprises, to understand you need to have a conversation with us. We will tell you, if you give us this, here's what we'll do with that. So you can make an informed risk-benefit analysis on that, but in an environment where you understand our threats are aligned. This is about culture. It's not about law. SEPA is a statute that was passed, a couple of provisions of a statute passed in the 1980s to govern how, in a criminal proceeding, we would handle classified information. It was designed to address concerns in the intelligence community that people like us would blow sources and methods by using a criminal process to incapacitate in a particular case. If you thought the problem was solved by the passage of the statute, you don't understand human culture. Because it wasn't good enough that the framework was there. We in the FBI had to convince our brothers and sisters in the intelligence community that we can be trusted, that we will have an adult conversation and we will protect your sources and methods. And that honestly took us about 2 decades to demonstrate that trustworthiness case by case by case by case. Until now, I think we're in a pretty good place. That if we need to use the criminal process to incapacitate, our brothers and sisters and the rest of the IC know how sophisticated we will be in protecting that information. So it took 20 years of lore to build on an episode of lawmaking in the 1980s. We've got to travel the same journey when it comes to cyber. We just got to travel it much, much faster than 20 years. We must figure out how to lean through that semi-permeable barrier and share in a more effective way.
I'm Alex Jones.
This is central to the FBI's effectiveness.
They are watching you.
A great example, Sony. The North Korean attack on Sony Pictures was a sophisticated, large, very, very aggressive attack. It likely would have been worse, but for Sony's relationship with the FBI. We knew Sony. We didn't know their secrets. We don't know what's in their memos, but we knew their CISO, we knew their CSO, we knew their physical layout, we knew the general layout of their networks. So that just like a fire department that knows your physical structure, and so when there's a smoky disaster knows where to go to find the standpipes and to rescue people, that's actually the way we were with Sony. We were on the ground at Sony very, very quickly, knew the people, didn't have to learn anything new about where to go, who to talk to, so we could remediate and try and stop that threat and investigate and ultimately attribute to the North Koreans. I've told all the CSOs in big companies around the country, if you don't know your FBI office and they don't know you in that same way, you're failing at your job. We need to make that barrier semi-permeable in an appropriate way. Then I want to say one other thing before I shut up. Going dark. Here's the problem that we face. We love encryption. I love encryption. I'm going to just keep saying that. I love encryption. I love privacy on the internet. I have an Instagram account. I have 9 followers. Right? They are all related to me. And then one daughter's serious boyfriend, because it's serious enough now, I finally accepted his request. And I post pictures when I visit. I'll probably post pictures from visiting this amazing place. I don't want anybody else looking at that. Anyone. I treasure my privacy. But I also have another obligation, given my job. It's to protect innocent people from bad things. Those 2 things that we all love, privacy and public safety, are crashing into each other. They're crashing into each other. And the best illustration of that I can offer you this morning is, we collected data from October, November, and December. 2,800 devices were presented to the FBI examiners by our agents or our state and local partners with court orders to open them. 43% of them we could not open with any technique, including classified techniques. 43%. That is a shadow falling across our work. Default, ubiquitous, strong encryption has a significant impact on our world. If you imagine, we operate in the FBI, imagine a room. The corner of the room, there's always been darkness there. The sophisticated actors were always, last 20 years, able to get encryption for their comms, encryption for their data at rest. Always a part of our room was dark. What's happened since the summer of 2013 is the default has become the darkness. And so what's happened is the darkness is spreading through the whole room. Now, I so far haven't offered you a value judgment about that. I'm just telling you what's happening. We need to talk to each other to figure out, how do we think about that? Is that a bad thing? Is that a good thing? What are the costs associated with that? What are the benefits on the privacy side of the way we are? But we shouldn't kid ourselves that we're not changing. And I don't think I'm overstating it when I say it this way. The fundamental compact at the core of our government is changing. Because the deal in America, since its founding, has always been there's no such thing as absolute privacy. The deal is, and has been since the founding, all of our papers and effects, all of our things are private, unless the people of the United States need to see it. And then with appropriate predication and oversight, they can see it. Go through our sock drawers, go through our safe deposit boxes, go through our cars, go through our bedrooms, go through the contents of our mind. All of us can be compelled in appropriate circumstances to say what we remember. But even my communications with my clergy member, my spouse, my attorney are not absolutely private in America. In appropriate circumstances, rare, thankfully, a judge can order that I talk about any of those communications or that any of those partners to that communication talk about what I said. There's never been absolute privacy in America, except now. Because what that shadow represents, I don't have my phone with me, but I love my phone. My life is on my phone. Right? It's not much of a life, honestly. I don't need much of the storage, but so are your lives. And that's a great, great thing. But as those devices become off limits to judicial authority, that's a change in the way we live. And the fundamental compact should not be changed by the FBI. No way. We investigate. Our job is to tell you how it's affecting our work. We should not decide what to do about it, but it should not be done by companies whose job it is to sell me an awesome, awesome mobile device. Their job is not to decide how the American people should live. The American people should decide how they live. And so my mission is simply to make sure people understand we're changing. And I don't want to get to a place where years from now people look at me. I have 6.5 years left in this amazing job, which I really do love. I'm getting shorter, I think, every year or so. But I don't want people looking at me and saying, hey, how come you didn't say something? Wow, everything's changed. I'm saying something. And I am not an enemy of encryption. I am not advocating for back doors. I say that till I can't speak anymore. It'll still be reported. I don't know exactly what the answer is. I reject the "it's impossible" response. I don't think it's impossible to optimize in a good way those two values. I don't. I just think we haven't actually tried it. And maybe as a country we'll decide, you know what? The benefits here are so extraordinary, and the dangers and the risks and the complications over here to address the public safety concerns are so hard, it's not worth doing. Or it's just too hard for our adult democracy to grapple with. Maybe. But I will not let it happen by default, by drift. I want people to know the work of the FBI in counterterrorism, counterintelligence, all our criminal work is being significantly affected by this. And I'm sure lots of smart people, you're thinking, well, what about metadata? Well, what about metadata? Metadata is wonderful. Right? The digital dust that bad guys leave is very, very valuable to us. It is no substitute for content, especially when the tools that I use require us, and I like it this way, to prove guilt to incapacitate beyond a reasonable doubt. You try proving guilt beyond a reasonable doubt off of metadata. On a child pornographer, on a kidnapper, on a terrorist, on a gangster. Very, very tall order. And maybe we don't care, but we should talk about it. And I want to end with one other thing. I care deeply about constraint and oversight, which is why I don't get frustrated much in this job, but I get frustrated when people report that I'm trying to dictate how we should structure ourselves and live. No, no, no. That's not my job. My job is to understand what the law is and abide it. I'm the 7th director of the FBI. I sit at the desk that I think all of us have sat at, directors of the FBI, and it has glass on it so I don't ruin it. And then under the right corner of that desk, I have put under that glass, I put a single piece of paper. And it is the October 1963 application, and I mean those air quotes, from J. Edgar Hoover to Robert F. Kennedy to bug and wiretap Martin Luther King Jr. And I say application because it's 5 sentences long. And it simply says, in substance, there's a communist influence in the racial situation, so we got to bug this guy King. It's without date limitation. It's without geographic limitation. It's signed by J. Edgar Hoover, and then Bobby Kennedy approved it. Boom, off to the races. And the reason I keep it there is that's the corner of my desk where every morning I'm in Washington, I put a stack of FISA applications that goes like this, thump, and lands on top of that. And the reason there's a thump is the FISA applications are almost always, I have skinny wrists, but significantly thicker than my wrist. It is a pain in the neck to get permission to conduct electronic surveillance in the United States. A pain in the neck. And that's great. Because that thickness, especially contrasted to that thinness, represents to me in a real physical way what constraint and oversight looks like. I think I'm an honest person. I believe half of what Admiral McRaven said about me. Right? I think I'm an honest person. But I think John Adams once said to Thomas Jefferson in one of their great letter exchanges, power always thinks it has a great soul. There's great danger that I will fall in love with my own virtue. The antidote to that is the courts, Congress, the Inspector General restraining me, checking me, nailing me when I make a mistake. The thickness of those FISA applications represents in living color what that constraint looks like. And so I keep it there to remind myself, but I keep it there because everybody in the FBI knows that story. Everybody in the FBI knows the director has that single page on Dr. King under his glass, and they know it in part because I require all of them to go through training and to study the FBI's interaction with Dr. King. I'm not picking on J. Edgar Hoover. I'm not picking on Bobby Kennedy. I have no doubt they believed they were doing the right thing. They were people who believed they were doing the right thing. And in the absence of someone saying, so wait a minute, what are your facts? What's the limitation? What will this look like? What's fair? What's right? What's appropriate? They acted in the way they believed best. We need to be constrained. We have awesome power to do good in the FBI, but if we fall in love with our own virtue, we can go sideways, which is why we stare at our history and why I do things like that. So, thank you for the conversation we're going to have. Thank you to a whole lot of folks in this audience for being a pain in our neck. For questioning us, for pushing us, for fighting with us on technology, fighting with us on our judgments about the optimization of those two things. That's great. Because the alternative is people fall in love with their own views and silent drift to places that maybe we don't want to drift to. So I thank you for listening to me, for supporting this great organization I'm part of, and I look forward to our conversation.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Director. I thought I'd take a page from the House Intelligence Committee. Now I've got
great.
30 pages of questions here. I think we've got about 10 hours, right? So no, right? So anyway, I'll just put a couple of questions to you to get the conversation going, but then we'll be eager to hear from the audience as well, especially you students out there. So first, wanted to follow up on one of the themes you talked about, which is what we still don't know about what causes homegrown domestic radicalization. You mentioned 1,000 active cases under investigation. I recall, in the early years after 9/11, one of the marvels of the United States is that we didn't have hardly any really domestic radicalization cases, but that's obviously changed, you mentioned. Given that we still don't know the secret sauce there, what have we learned as a country, as an intelligence community, especially as the FBI? Have we learned any particular indicators or warning signs or patterns on what causes someone to take that path?
Yeah, it's a hard question. Yeah. We've learned, to state the obvious, that the internet has transformed the way we live, the way we communicate with each other, the way we seek meaning. And as I said, what this is about is troubled people who may be drug users, maybe child pornographers, maybe just disaffected teens, people with broken relationships, seeking meaning. And what the internet makes everybody, as I said, a next-door neighbor to everybody else, it allows them to consume and to live in a different world without ever leaving their computer or their mobile device. And because it's a search for meaning, we're really struggling to find the markers of it, honestly. Our cases span from 15 to 60-something, and there is no particular, the reason we have those cases all over the country is there's no particular hotspot in America. It's wherever people are seeking meaning in a misguided way. It's not a phenomenon that's occurring in religious institutions. There's not a physical locus of this radicalization because it's happening online. The one thing that is true in nearly every case, somebody saw something. And the somebodies tend to be overwhelmingly family sees a change or friends see a change. And then the third consistency is they don't tell us. But they don't tell us, and then you have the typical TV interviews afterwards. He seemed like such a nice man, or I knew he was struggling with things. People see things. And so getting them to talk to us about that is really hard for two reasons. First, all human beings write an innocent narrative over difficult facts. It's just a part of being human. You see something and you say, he's probably just not feeling well. And so you write an innocent narrative over those facts. And second, there is a barrier, obviously, between the private and the public, and especially when it comes to talking to the FBI or law enforcement about somebody you love. But somehow we've got to get to a place where people feel the need and the obligation to tell us in a way they're not today.
Well, if we can follow up on that then, because obviously there's the paradox or the tension that a lot of the problem does come from some vulnerable communities, primarily Islamic communities, and we rely very much on friends and family saying something. If you see something, saying something. At the same time, if there's too much of an intrusive approach by our investigatory services, that can have the effect of alienating and corroding trust in those communities. How are you dealing with that tension?
By trying to get up close. I'm a big believer it's hard to hate up close, and to make sure that the FBI, and when I say the FBI in the counterterrorism world, I mean the Joint Terrorism Task Forces, so it's state and local partners, other federal partners, that we know the communities that might be most affected by this, and they understand two things about the FBI. We recently rewrote the FBI's mission statement because it was a paragraph long, and I thought its power should be able to be expressed more simply. So the mission of the FBI is to protect the American people and uphold the Constitution of the United States. That's it. And we need to be able to connect with families and imams and teachers and immigrant communities of all kinds and have them understand we take both parts of that very seriously. We are here, if you are bullied and picked on and threatened, we are here to make sure that stops. And we're also here to make sure that what we share is we don't want our young people or any of our people going into pursuing a path of violence. And so we take both of those seriously. And if we can get up close enough to people to understand we're just ordinary folks, that a lot of the fear and the solidness of the barrier will be eroded, will drop down.
I want to turn now, just for my final question before we turn it over to the audience, to the going dark debate, which you brought up there at the end. And of course, Austin is not quite Silicon Valley, but we have a very vibrant tech sector here. We missed you at South by Southwest the other week, but I understand Dudu's calling there. But
they described my general counsel as criminally bland when he was there. And,
are you going to give him a promotion?
No, those were my instructions.
Okay, that's right.
Go there and be criminally bland.
Okay, can we follow up, probe a little bit more, though, on this national conversation that you're calling for, which does certainly seem appropriate, because at the end of the day, this does reside in the consent of the governed the American people. Some of the concerns we hear from some of the tech companies is that if they were to create some sort of front door means to decryption, that they could lose market share to foreign companies who will essentially not follow that, and also that could open the devices to hacking by malevolent private actors. I guess when you hear those concerns from the tech sector, how do you respond?
Reasonable concerns. To take the international piece first, I think whatever we do, ideally should have some international component. I could imagine a community of nations committed to the rule of law developing a set of norms, a framework for when government access is appropriate, what judicial standards are at work, what the obligations appropriately are. I also, because I don't want to be any part of chasing the innovation from this great country to other places. But here's what people, I think folks get this, but I'll say it anyway. There's a danger that we, the mother and father of all this innovation, will be the last to solve it among the community of nations, because the people of France and Germany and the UK and Australia are working to solve this problem, and we may end up in a place where patchwork addressing of the challenge I'm talking about leads to something that hurts American enterprise, a balkanization of data, for example, an inconsistent set of standards. But look, it's going to be very, very hard for technical reasons, which I'll get to in a second, and the nature of that international mix that we have to address. The technical thing, look, I really do think we haven't given this the shot it deserves. President Obama commissioned some work at the end of his administration because he'd heard a lot from people on device encryption. It's too hard. It's not too hard. It's not too hard. It requires a change in business model, but it is, according to experts inside the U.S. government and a lot of people who will meet with us privately in the private sector. No one wants to actually be seen with us. But when we meet them out behind the 7-Eleven, they tell us, look, it's a business model decision. Take the FBI's business model. We equip our agents with mobile devices that I think are great mobile devices, and we've worked hard to make them secure. We've designed it so that we have the ability to access the content. Right? And so I don't think we have a fatally flawed mobile system in the FBI, and I think nearly every enterprise that's represented here probably has the same. You retain the ability to access the content. So look, one of the worlds I could imagine, I don't know whether this makes sense, but one of the worlds I could imagine is a requirement that if you're going to sell a device or market a device in the United States, you must be able to comply with judicial process. You figure out how to do it. And maybe that doesn't make sense absent an international component to it, but I just don't think and look, I get it. The makers of devices and the makers of fabulous apps that are riding on top of our devices, on top of our networks, really don't have an incentive to internalize the public safety harm. And I get that. My job is to worry about public safety. Their job is to worry about innovating and selling more units. I totally get that. Somehow we have to bring together and see if we can't optimize those two things. And really, given my role, I should not be the one to say, here's what the technology should look like, nor should they say, I don't really care about that public safety aspect. And what I don't want to have happen, and I know you agree with me no matter what you think about this, I think you're going to agree with what I'm about to say, is we can't have this conversation after something really bad happens. And look, I don't want to be a pessimist, but bad things are going to happen. And even I'm the director of the FBI, do not believe that we can have thoughtful conversations about optimizing things we care about in the wake of a serious, serious attack of any kind. I think Holmes said there's no detached reflection in the face of an upraised knife. There's not a whole lot of detached reflection in the wake of a major incident that implicates these values and these concerns. So not only is our room becoming darker, but we're wasting time to try to figure out how thoughtful people would resolve this conflict because we won't be able to have that conversation later. And I probably won't like, given how I feel about constraint, I probably won't like what we come up with in the wake of a serious event, because then the American people are going to go on fire. And it'll be harder to have a thoughtful, nuanced balancing of interests.
Yeah, right. All right, questions from the audience. So preferably students. Okay, you see Emily Whalen over there. So get a microphone. There we go. And please introduce yourself.
Okay, my name's Emily Whalen. I'm a doctoral candidate in the history department here. Thank you so much, Director Comey, for your remarks. I appreciated in particular how you kind of painted for us this clash between public safety and privacy. And I would add to that, I think there's a sort of another dimension, which is the negotiated transparency that the intelligence community has had to engage in sort of the past 5 to 10 years. So my question is, did the public response to the announcement about the investigation into Secretary Clinton's emails last fall shape the Bureau's way of handling the Bureau's approach to the most recent announcement about the ongoing investigation into President Trump's campaign? Thank you.
I'm not going to talk about it. If you didn't get enough of me on Monday.
Okay, great. All right, they're in the back there, Amy. So, that's right. We get a microphone over to Amy.
Well, but you reminded me of something I should have said to the group. I often hear from thoughtful people that maybe the answer to your challenge is more government hacking. That is, the good guys and gals develop 0 days, store them, figure out how to break into devices, those kinds of things. That's a reasonable suggestion. My reaction to it is it's just not scalable. And really, that's how we want to solve a collision between values in America, is saying to the FBI, invest more money in trying to defeat that which we are selling to our consumers. It just doesn't seem to me to be sensible in light of that, and also feasible in terms of scaling. Because the darkness in the room I'm talking about overwhelmingly affects state and local law enforcement. And so the police department in Austin does not have the resources to be investing in figuring out how to break into iPhones as the iOS versions iterate. They just don't. And the first time they did, and it was discussed in a case, it's gone. So I don't see it as scalable or sustainable. And I have no comment on the other thing. Okay.
Thank you so much for being here with us. My name is Amy Pillsbury-Price. You spoke about imposing costs on cyber criminals and naming and shaming countries that harbor these criminals. Many of the cyber attacks that dominate the news come from countries that don't respond to normative naming and shaming. So what else can we do?
Yeah, that's a great question. And part of it is beyond the FBI's expertise and responsibilities. I believe we have made progress with our Chinese counterparts in the wake of the indictments of the 3 PLA actors. And there was lots of robust debate about whether it made sense at the time, and maybe the causal chain isn't as tight as I'm about to make it sound, but I do think we've arrived at a place where they understand and accept the framework that we have urged, which is nation states engage in intelligence gathering. Always have, always will. Always try and find out the plans and intentions and policies of other nations with whom they might be in conflict or rivals or for reasons that make sense. Nation states do not steal stuff to make money. That is criminal conduct. This is traditional state craft. And at least in our conversations and in some of the actions they've taken to investigate on leads we've supplied, our Chinese counterparts embrace and understand that distinction. Now, it's not as clear as it may seem, but especially when you're talking about a country where there isn't a clear divide between public and private, but at least that framework has been understood and seems to be, it's being given life. What to do with, the Chinese are people that we can have an adult conversation with, and they'll tell us what they think, we'll tell them what we think. What to do with countries that are not people you can have an adult conversation with is much, much harder. If it's a nation that doesn't care about shame, doesn't care about what neighbors, friends, and allies think about them, that's very, very hard. And so right there, that's where my expertise and responsibilities stop. There may be things that are available to our government, tools in our government's toolbox, but they're not ones I can competently talk about here. I couldn't talk about here anyway, but they're not mine, and so I can't talk about them in a good way, regardless of the environment. So that's how I think about it. That's an unsatisfactory answer, but that's the best one I can give you.
Thanks. All right. We're going to take one last question here because the director's got a tight schedule from Larry right here. So right in the middle. Thanks. Oh, sorry. It's Larry right behind you, Steve. Sorry. Yeah. Come back next year. All right. Okay.
Director, you talked about the pernicious influence of online activities and those maybe tasting the poison. Do you think there is a role for a more active removal of that poison online, or are there too many practical, technical, and constitutional impediments to taking that kind of action, deleting the poison?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think there's significant and appropriate constitutional impediments to the government having an active role in doing that. I always think there's more that private sector entities can do to police the content that's being posted on their platforms or coursing their networks. The good news is a lot of people dumped on Twitter a lot at the beginning of the rise of the so-called Islamic State. I actually think Twitter's done quite a good job, and I don't think it was driven entirely by the Islamic State's threat to kill the CEO of Twitter, which helped them see the darkness in a way that I do. But I do think they've understood it's not good for them as a business matter to have this kind of poison on there. The challenge, which was embedded in your question, is vast, complicated, everything lives forever. Sometimes people who are new to government say, why don't we just take this off the internet? First of all, what is the internet exactly, do you mean? And take it off? There is no it. And it's Anwar-Awlaki, as I said, lives forever on the internet. So I think there's more we can do. We should be careful about not making sure that we're not actively involved in it. But I also think, I don't want to be optimistic, it's in a way a fool's errand. You can be better, but nowhere near good enough given the nature of the technology.
All right, well, please join me in thanking Director Comey for being with us today.